concept of outcome-based education, how to articulate learning outcomes and program learning outcomes, mapping them to matrices, and how to use various tools to evaluate the achievement of learning outcomes and graduate attributes. So let me start by a blanket talking about simple definitions. And it's not a definition per se, but to understand certain concept. We have, at least in my opinion, 4 types of curriculums that we have in every academic program: a declared curriculum, a taught curriculum, a learned curriculum, and there is the heading curriculum. In a very fast way, declared curriculum is the curriculum that's declared by the learning outcomes. We have a list of learning outcomes that are declared to everybody. This is our declared curriculum. This is our intention, what we are going to be doing in the form of the attainable learning outcomes. The taught curriculum is actually what the instructor, the faculty, has taught in the class or facilitated to allow student learning. Now that is distilled even further by how much of that curriculum have been learned by the students. And we measure that by learning outcomes assessment. The heading curriculum is almost everywhere. It's a very broad term, a very broad learning continuum where students learn by having a role model, by attitudes of all who they interact with. That is not declared. Sometimes it's not even measurable or definable exactly how, because every student will get a different set of let's say, different set of learning, of skills, thoughts, attitudes, pieces of knowledge from the heading curriculum, which is very, very, very important. And it does shape sometimes how the declared learning outcomes are being achieved. In a similar way, we have a big umbrella called the graduate attributes that can be served by a set of competencies, and those served by learning outcomes. We'll not talk about competencies that much today. We'll talk about learning outcomes and how they are mapped or served to graduate attributes. So the graduate attributes are the overarching transferable skills that the students will acquire by the time they graduate. In most cases, the graduate attributes of a program are either identical to that of an institution or highly mapped and aligned to it. Learning outcomes, the attainment of learning outcomes, is what actually leads to the shaping and the attainment of the graduate attributes. So the graduate attributes are broad qualities, skills. They are mainly transferable skills. They are usually the attributes that the students graduate with from an institution or a program. The learning outcomes are more specific. They're measurable statements. They guide our course design, assessment, and program activities. Competencies are specific skills that are kind of a combination of learning outcomes, because a skill can include knowledge, behavior, and abilities within it. And this skill is important in a certain particular context. For example, a profession like being an engineer or a dentist or a pharmacist or a physician, they should have the set of skills. Just a comparison, graduate attributes are broad, learning outcomes are more specific. Graduate attributes are overarching statements that tell us what the students will be equipped with to tackle work life, and even sometimes everyday work. Program learning outcomes are really is what the curriculum is all about. The graduate attributes, it's applies to the entire educational experience of the program, college, or institution, as I said. But the learning outcomes are very specific to the program the students are enrolled in. General overarching, again, more specific. Example of graduate attributes is critical thinking, effective communication, ethical reasoning, global citizenship, sometimes empathy. With program learning outcomes, we go for very specific statements that have expectations. We'll talk about that in more details as we go on forward. And again, let me just iterate what Mona said. You can interrupt me at any time for a question or a clarification, but these are just blanket ideas and definitions to start our discussion. So what are the purpose of learning outcomes? One of the most important purpose of learning outcomes, the clarity and transparency expectations for learners and instructors. When the student is enrolled in the program, they can see what is being expected of them by the time they graduate. When they start the course, they can see what is expected of them when they finish that course. So in a way, they can understand the purpose of the program or the purpose of the course just by reviewing the learning outcomes.
वाले फॉर्म जो है ना वो जो भी उन्होंने
Alignment of the curriculum with assessment. We should only assess learning outcomes through a program or through a course. So if we are only assessing the learning outcomes, the curriculum should address the learning outcomes to begin with. So the curriculum should facilitate the achievement of the learning outcomes, and the assessment should really evaluate the achievement of learning outcomes by learners. So they are very interconnected and very important. Consistency, accountability, and continuous improvement. Attainment of learning outcomes, the level of attainment of learning outcomes. And now we might introduce something called the quality of attainment of learning outcomes will guide our continuous improvement of the course or the program or both of them. The enhanced teaching and learning. Again, this comes from the clarity and transparency of expectation. Hopefully, students at this time of era, at this time of the era in higher education, students should start to assume an active role in their own learning. They should own the process in a certain way. And faculty should start to become more of facilitators. So that is a very important aspect of enhancement of learning and teaching. Career readiness. The learning outcomes should be linked to career and professional requirements and expectations. Student self-assessment and reflection. When the students know what is expected of them, they can really assess how much of those learning outcomes they have attained. Not how many, not just how many, even within a learning outcome, how far they came. If a student does not know that, I think faculty, instructors, facilitators, teachers, no matter what you like to call them, should actually sit down with those students and tell them exactly how they can do that. There is some ways that are can be done from the institution part or the program part, like progress tests. Things can be done in collaboration between the student and the program, like portfolios of learning. Designing graduate attributes. So the graduate attributes should be aligned with the mission, values, and the philosophy of the institution. Should involve internal and external stakeholders. Should focus on transferable and cross-disciplinary skills. Again, like I said, cognitive skills, critical thinking, problem solving, information literacy, interpersonal skills like communication, teamwork, and leadership, personal qualities and values like ethical reasoning, global citizenship, social responsibility and accountability, professional skills like project management, adaptability, lifelong learning. I'm not saying that every single program or institution should have every single one of those, but it depends on what are their mission, values, and philosophy. They should be very clear. And this applies to learning outcomes. And then those should be aligned to measurable outcomes to facilitate assessment, because the only way we can really ensure that, at least at the program level, that the students are starting to acquire these graduate attributes is by ensuring that the program learning outcomes are being attained, and that can be only assured by assessment. Review and update design of learning outcomes, design of anything, at least in education. It's not a one-time issue. We design it, we are set for life. There is always reviews and updates. It's actually reviews and updates are the only constant in academia. graduate attributes should be communicated clearly to internal and external stakeholders. These are just examples. I will go through them very, very fast. So when you look, I fetched the missions and the graduate attributes of 4 international institutions. And this University of Oxford, for example, it seeks to develop global citizens who lead. So the graduate attributes should include global citizenship, should include leadership, should include emphasis on ethical practices and innovation. And if you look there, you can find that ethical responsibility, addressing complex global challenges, global awareness. It's very clear in the graduate attributes. Harvard will be the same. And Stanford, University of Cambridge will also be the same. I know this is, so just forgive me if I put any slides or talk about anything that are very known to you very much, but just to have a continuous discussion where I don't miss any parts of it that can cater to all types of audience. When we talk about learning outcomes, we are talking about outcome-based education. And the school where I've come from, the ideal way of doing that is backward design, where you have the mission at hand, the needs. What's the mission? What's the needs? Why we are having this program to begin with? Then we go and design the learning outcomes. After that, we can really design the content, then assessment, then go to teaching strategies. So teaching strategies are at the very, very end. Usually what we used to do before, we start with the content. How we are going to teach the content, teaching objectives. Then think about assessment. Then an afterthought comes learning outcomes. But I'm not mocking forward design. Many of our programs were established before the idea of learning outcomes. I still go to institution, talk to certain faculty members, colleagues, where they inherited courses that have been designed way long before the idea of learning outcomes. So I don't see any harm in doing it forward design from what they have and go to learning outcomes. But the time they reach learning outcomes, they, by far 99% of these things will, oh my God, I have now to really go back again, because these learning outcomes, they are not really served 100% by my content, or the content is, we have extra things in the content that we are wasting the student times and we are not assessing. They should not be a part of the learning outcomes, so it's removed from the content. Or our assessment does not really serve very well the learning outcomes that we came up with. So even if we do it backward, forward design for existing courses, programs, inspecting everything by backward, looking at it backward will lead us to do it, to redesign it, or let's say refine it by backward design. So designing learning outcomes. So we have the overarching ones, the program learning outcomes. They are served by multiple course learning outcomes. You can even go more granular to have lecture learning outcomes or lab session learning outcomes, and so on and so forth. I've seen all that, and yeah, you can have learning outcomes to a session or a mini session, and you can keep up. And some institutions, they even have institutional learning outcomes. So if you want to go in a very hierarchical way, you have session learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, college learning outcomes for colleges offering multiple programs, then institutional learning outcomes. And on top of that are the institutional graduate attributes. I don't like they use the word of intended learning outcomes. I prefer the learning outcomes in the back, in our mind, to be something that need to be achieved, must be achieved, because learning outcomes, we need to look at them as being graduation requirements. And this is where we miss the mark when we talk about learning outcomes. And I did not want to stress upon it here, but actually every learning outcomes should be achieved by every student before they graduate. And this, in a way, does contradict most of our practices in assessing learning outcomes. We accept partial attainment or even sometimes no attainment. But program learning outcomes, let's keep this in our minds. Program learning outcomes are graduation requirements. Poorly written learning outcomes will lead to poor assessment, and poorly chosen action verbs will lead to poor assessment. We'll talk about action verbs later because they are, in a way, the essence of the learning outcome. You can lose the whole learning outcomes if you miss the first verb or you put a verb that does not really match your expectations. Now, I'm talking to in a Omani context now, the learning outcomes should cover the relevant Omani qualification learning qualification framework learning domains, which is knowledge, skills, communication, numeracy, information communication, technology, skills, anatomy, autonomy and responsibility, employability and values, and learning to learn. And this is very, very important lifelong learning. So learning outcomes, when they are designed, they have to map to those domains, maybe not all of them, depending on the nature of the program. Also, in any qualification framework, it's not only the domains. Here there are 6, others they have 5, others they have 3. It's also something called the level descriptor. These domains are translated by something called level descriptors at the qualification level. So a bachelor program learning outcome, the expectation from knowledge will be different from that for a student in a master's program or in a PhD program. Skills the same, learning to learn is the same. So we can easily say that the level of the learning outcome and the expectation from the learning outcome, the achievement of the learning outcome, quantity and equality goes up in depth and breadth as we go up from a lower level qualification. It's because it's higher education, it's say bachelor, to higher level qualification, master's or a PhD. So the increment in depth and breadth is very important, and covering the domains that is appropriate to the program is also very, very important. So learning outcomes should always start with a measurable action verb. Prefer to have one action verb per learning. I started by saying I prefer because I know that there is other schools that say you can put 2, 3, sometimes 5 learning outcome verbs in the learning outcome. I prefer one action verb to facilitate assessment. The learning outcome should, after the verb, that should be the content of the learning outcome. I will show an example, the context if necessary. And the learning outcome have to be attached to a assessment method and the criteria that is defined the acceptable level of performance. Smart learning outcomes, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time appropriate. I will not go through that. But just quickly to just explain what I meant by content and context. So the measurable learning outcome is discussed. So I'm expecting the student to be able to discuss the role of insulin, where, what, how, in the transfer of sugar into cells. I'm expecting the student to be able to construct complex sentences, what contain adverbial clauses. Recall the application of optics and lasers. Where? In air flight guidance? No, in medicine. So it's very clear that this is coming from a medical program. Then somewhere, maybe in a different column, you map these learning outcomes to a suitable assessment tool or method. Assessment of graduate attributes and program learning outcomes. I don't know if I'm putting too much emphasis on this now because the previous webinar was about assessing learning outcomes, whether they are course or program CLOs or PLOs. But it is always good to review. There may be some, here I'm not going into the specifics, I am giving general ideas. So the assessment of learning outcomes is usually direct or indirect assessment. The direct assessment is anything that is evaluating a tangible performance by a student, examination, project presentations, portfolios. The indirect assessment is more of, let's say, safe to say it's opinions, surveys, reflections, peer reviews. They are not reviewing a tangible student performance. A performance now, very, very, very important also, is to attach the assessment learning outcomes to standard or a criteria or a benchmark, which says that this learning outcomes have to be achieved 100%. This learning outcome can be achieved by 80%. Now, I've seen it all over the place. Sometimes the benchmark or the criteria is for the learning outcomes, the level of achievement. Sometimes, which I think very, very dangerous, is when it's put by how many students or the fraction of students that will achieve this learning outcome. If they say from the first time, maybe I can agree to it, but this means that you are allowing students to graduate from a certain course or a program that did not achieve that specific learning outcome. If they can graduate without achieving it, then nobody needs to achieve it, because we are graduating civil engineers, for example. So which of these learning outcomes you agree that 20% of the students not to achieve them? It's a very critical discussion. How to go about discussing these benchmarks, compare to other well-developed programs, consult professional standards, review employer requirements, analyze your baseline and historical data, invite external and internal experts. What target did you put to yourself in the mission? How do you define yourself as a program or as an institution? Usually, the wrong practice is that somebody at the top level of management will sit down and say, okay, I think the learning outcomes for all the programs, for all the learning outcomes in my college should be 80%. Or no, the knowledge is not very important these days. We'll give it 70%, put on the skill 90%. It should be a teamwork based on benchmarking themselves. Direct assessment, there's so many types of direct assessment. But to have a direct assessment of graduate attributes, it have to be linked to program learning outcomes that are linked to course learning outcomes. So the direct assessment of learning outcomes are usually coming from the course up to the program, going up to the graduate attribute. So the curriculum mapping, you have to align graduate attributes and program learning outcomes to courses or course learning outcomes. In course assessment, there must be evidence of the achievement of graduate attributes. Multiple courses, and this is, I think, empirical, multiple courses can be mapped to one graduate attribute or multiple graduate attributes. Same for learning outcomes, because the graduate attributes like critical thinking, there is not one single course that will make a student a critical thinker. There will be multiple instances in multiple courses, multiple learning experiences, so whether it's didactic or practical, that can lead to the shaping of a certain graduate attribute or the achievement of a learning outcome. Rubrics are very, very important. Rubrics can give you an excellent measure. Yes, Mona.
Can you go over the second point, assessment design? In-course assessment must evidence the achievement of the graduate attributes. Can you give us example and elaborate a little bit on that part? Because I think this is a very critical part that we all wonder about it in our different fields. And for example, where we are in art and design, and you always wonder, are we going to use portfolios? Are we going to see how the student progress from one studio to the next? So can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Now, since you brought up the design programs, for example, although I am a pharmacist, but I do understand something about design programs. Now, I put this here so that I will tell people or ignite a thinking in people as the assessment that we are using currently can tell the student, can tell the educator, the faculty, the teacher, the trainer, what graduate attributes and program learning outcomes this program is looking for. So when we look usually, for example, at, let's say, the most common assessment tool, which is the MCQs. it will be very difficult to embed that in MCQs or to tell from MCQs that, oh, we are trying to get a student to become a critical thinker. But this is why immediately after that, I said adoption of rubrics. This is where it can be really, really, let's say, shine. These things can shine. A rubric is not only assessing a single point of knowledge or cognitive skill. It's assessing, let's say, an ensemble of things at the same time. So within these rubrics, we can easily embed that, for example, discussion during a presentation. We can embed the critical thinking there or problem solving there easily. And then people can say, oh, this course, this rubric is really now serving a graduate attribute that is related to critical learning, critical thinking, or to problem solving. Learning to learn as a domain of learning outcomes. I think portfolio can show you if, or can tell the student that we would like to embed in you or to instill in you the value or the learning outcome or the graduate attribute to be a lifelong learner. And let me show you, you have been learning this and this and that based on instructional design, but you also learned this and that but in your own. You volunteered to do this. You enrolled in this. You designed this, and this was not in the learning outcome, something like that. So I think it's a complex issue, but it can be done. But we have to really leave traditional assessment and, in a way, embrace. I don't want to keep throwing names here, but to embrace authentic assessment. If we embrace authentic assessment, we can show everybody the evidence in our in-course assessment. Am I clear or I complicated things?
No, thank you. I think you answered my question. Thank you.
So just to go over the slide, rubrics are a criterion-based evaluation. Criterion-based evaluation, which is something to what Mona was trying to get out of me, and then maybe I complicated things. The good thing about rubrics that they are usually, if they are designed well and assessed by multiple raters or graders, there is fairness. But they are difficult to design. But if they are designed correctly, they are very effective. They can be used to assess so many things, simple ones, presentations, debates, teamwork. Other types of direct assessment is capstone project and courses. Again, here, we can show how the in-course assessment assess graduate attributes and learning outcomes, even without showing the very critical mapping of every single part of that course or that project. Again, these projects have to be assessed by multiple assessors. You will find this theme in more than one place. Longitudinal assessment, portfolio and progress test. Portfolios, I think all of you know portfolios. I really love the idea of portfolios because this way, the learning journey of the student can be documented from the first time the portfolio is being used till the last time it's being used, graduation. And if these portfolio are portable, they are and these have to be electronically portable. They are in electronic format that can be easily accessed by employers later or by graduate school. Then the student, instead of just providing a transcript with the grades, they can submit this portfolio and show the employer or the graduate school that they're applying for how they progressed, how they learned, how they took responsibility of their own learning, how they matured. And this will give the employer or the graduate school a very good idea of whom they are accepting into their work environment or into their graduate program or residency program or training program. I don't think that grades will tell a story about how good a physician is or a pharmacist is or a designer is. But a portfolio with samples of student achievement and incremental progression and improvement is excellent. I see a raised hand, maybe only one. Farida?
Thank you, Prof. Usually we hear the word portfolio in assessment in engineering colleges, architecture. Could you please elaborate more how this can be applicable in health education, health profession, as a pharmacist? As I came from a pharmaceutical bachelor degree long time ago, really confused how it can be other than seminars or we usually maybe we have clinical training or a training in the pharmaceutical industry. Is how things before going to the training will be reflected in the portfolio. Engineering school, usually they have projects starting year one. How this will be reflected, or how we will have as a health professions or health education a portfolio.
Thank you very much. You actually answered a big part of the question yourself. Now, portfolios in health are for now, they are most commonly used in the clinical use and the clinical training. And you would like to see how we can implement it prior to that. I think it's the same thing. If we start by having now, first of all, for a portfolio, we cannot really rely on a traditional assessment and MCQs, but we can, if we try to embed authentic assessment, like team projects during the preclinical years, debates, lucid presentation that also is there. Let's say reflections. This is a very important part, reflection of the students on their own learning. And you can really see how the quality of products mature. Reports turned out in the early years, how they mature for how the reports are being written by the students in the more senior years. The debates, the quality of debates, the quality of arguments, how they mature as the student progress. The quality of presentations, the depth of discussion in the presentation. Also, you need to also document how the students have reflected in their education, in their learning in the first year of the School of Pharmacy, the second year, the third year, and go on and above. The more you utilize portfolio in education, the more you find purposes for it. I also been asking to use portfolios in graduate schools, where students can experiment on their level in performing experimentations. They need supervision at the beginning, then they start to do it autonomously, then they start to make up their own experiments and change on the experiments that are published in the literature. I hope that I answered this also to a certain extent. A progress test is more of a formal test done by the institution itself, where this test is given to the whole, to everybody in the program. Let's say it's a history program. This test is given the same exact 100 questions given to year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. The progress of the students can be monitored by the progress test as they progress from one academic year to the other. Other types of learning direct assessment is formative assessment. I've seen it in certain areas where some people think that formative assessment, because it does not include a grade, it is an indirect assessment. No, it is a direct assessment. Feedback by itself is an assessment. It does not have to be always tied to a numerical grade or to a letter grade. So formative assessment actually can be sometimes more effective in assessing learning than the summative assessment that we are using. This is why they call it assessment for learning, because you are assessing the students, giving them feedback, identifying the gaps without threatening them with a grade. So the end result after that will be go relearn or upskill or improve learning. These are the gaps. Go and bridge the gaps. We can have peer assessment, informative assessment in a safe way. We are not afraid of of peer bias with or against their peers. Rubrics can be used for formative assessment too. Mock presentations can be used for formative assessment. Self-assessment and peer assessment, which is assessment at learning students, they learn as they assess their peer. This can be done a part of formative assessment. They can be about portfolio. Self-assessment is reflection in portfolio, is a form of self-assessment. Reflective essays, which could be a part of portfolios or independent of a portfolio, are also a part of self-assessment. Peer assessment, as you know, should not be used to really decide if a student pass or fail a certain activity or a certain course, but it is either a formative or have a very small percentage depending on the philosophy of the program and the estimate of the program. Indirect assessment, it can be student surveys, graduate surveys, alumni surveys, exit interviews, learning outcome surveys. When you just ask students, how do they feel about their attainment in a certain learning outcome, student reflections on attainment of learning outcomes, and peer reviews. Now let's come to a little bit more practical things. It's good to have these kind of tables, which we call matrices, a table that really show you how the graduate attributes are mapped to learning outcomes and how the learning outcomes are mapped to courses and how we are expected to assess the learning outcomes in that course to lead to that graduate attribute. So just I'm putting examples from multiple fields. A graduate attribute that students have to be digitally literate or digital literacy, demonstrate proficiency in using digital tools and platforms. This is a direct specific learning outcomes. This will be in a course called Introduction to Information System. I can assist by digital projects or very spot-on quizzes, for example. Problem solving, easy. Analyze problems using appropriate methodologies in a mathematics course. Problem set, final examination. Lifelong learning. These are difficult to assess. But if there is a course called professional development, which is rarely available in our programs, identify opportunities for continuous learning and skill development. This could be in a portfolio or a self-reflection. Assessment matrix now. This is taking the last column and elaborating on it more. PLO1 in a pharmacology course, case studies, analysis exams, and this is the criteria. These criteria are not the ones that I like, but I'm telling you what is there in the literature. 70% of the students score more than 75%. So what does that mean? What about the 25% of the students who scored less than 75%? Do I accept a score of 0? We have to be very careful here. What are we going to use? Case studies, rubrics, exams. Result, 70% meet the target. This is even more dangerous. More dangerous, 70% meeting the target. Mona, do you want to say something?
Yeah, can we go to the previous matrix and maybe just go, yes. Can you go through it a little bit again, because so we can digest it? Okay,
I thought it's okay. So now, this is what we call a mapping matrix. Usually, in many cases, it stops at the course. So what the graduate attributes is mapped to what learning outcomes mapped to which course. So in a way, attainment of the learning outcomes of the course, first one, Introduction to Information Systems, means that this learning outcome have been attained. So that learning outcome contributes to building or attaining a graduate attribute called digital literacy. Similar way, for example, teamwork. Collaborative design projects. It could be called design project, just a design project. Collaborative, just maybe in a way saying that this course is not a project done by one person. It's a collaborative design. Because I've seen it, design projects and design projects, they're done group. So don't worry about the name. I design a project course. We expect that it could be collaborative, so that will teach the students teamwork. So working in teams will allow them to attain the learning outcomes called work effectively in a team environment. Now, that will contribute to a learning outcome to be a team worker or a team player. How to assess that is the last column. How you can assess teamwork abilities or teamwork behavior or teamwork attitude in students. Observation. You observe the group work. There's no examination that if a student answers a question there will tell you that this student is going to be an effective player within a team. But you have to observe it. And this is why we need rubrics sometimes. If we leave assessment of group work behavior or the attitude of a certain student in a team to just observing and at the end having one word or two words, cooperative or team player, or without really dissecting that into performance criteria in a rubric, it will be almost impossible. Lifelong learning, again, I said, it is if there is a course called professional development, or if it's not a course, we can assess that longitudinally or vertically in multiple courses. But we have to identify which courses does have a professional development element to it. Or if not a course, other learning activities. Usually we call them all courses, but it could be a lab. It could be against a group project or I don't want to go into now untouched territories to talk about extracurricular activities that are linked to learning outcomes, for example.
Okay.
Is that okay here?
Yes, yes.
I know that some of the courses, the way they were named in the column is a bit confusing. Sorry for that.
Definitely need more than one course to achieve program learning outcomes and the graduate attributes.
Exactly. This is why just problem solving, I put 2 learning outcomes. From an engineering course will have, for sure, will have a mathematics course and it will have an engineering design course. So these 2 courses can lead to problem solving, although they are most likely going to be really apart in the academic levels in the same program. Applied mathematics can be in year 1, maybe. Engineering design can be in year 3, but both of them are serving one graduate attribute, which is problem solving. And one course can serve multiple graduate attributes. So let me go here also, and we'll go here also a little bit slowly because I know this table can be also confusing. Now, again, learning outcome, program learning outcome is served by a course. For example, these are just examples. Pharmacology course. In pharmacology course, I'm using methods like case studies, analysis, and exams. These are my main assessment methods in a pharmacology course. Case studies where students will discuss a case where there is a scenario, somebody, age, symptoms, disease, what drugs we are going to give that patient. Now, I will accept attainment of this learning outcomes by 70% of the students scoring more than 75%. In the assessment tool column, I am again saying what I am using as a tool. So the case study analysis, I am assessing it by a rubric. And the exam is an exam. There is no, it's just a reiteration that the exam is an exam. It could be written sometimes MCQ exam. It could be wrote short essay exam. It could be written a long open-ended exam. It depends on the exam. It can be elaborated more. Now, also in that exam, how do I kind of judge that my exam is credible if 70% of the students meet the target? I think this result column needs more elaboration. I think it's in the wrong place. So sorry for that. I look at it now. I think we'll only need the performance criteria. The result column I can easily remove from the presentation without losing any meaning. Now, the last column is actually what's very important to me. Okay, we have a learning outcome. We know what are the courses that are serving the learning outcome. We know what the assessment method that we are using. We put the performance criteria whether we like it or not. We know the assessment tool. Forget about the result column. It's wrong. Should not be there. The most important thing is the improvement action. Based on the performance criteria achievement, what should I do to improve? So let's say that the target was not met. What should I do? Provide additional critical thinking exercises and case studies, for example. This could be an improvement action, probably to be discussed among the educators or the teacher or instructor in that course and decide what to do. Incorporate more peer review sessions. Increase hands-on practice in the simulation lab. So the improvement action should be based on how close are we to achieving the performance criteria. So one question that I always get asked, what if the performance criteria was surpassed? So I put 90% of the student, 85% of the student demonstrate competency in the clinical practicum for patient assessment. What if the students' result at the end came back and 80% of them demonstrate capacity, or 95% of them demonstrate capacity? What will be an improvement action? If anybody would like to say something here, what is the improvement action if your students attained the learning outcomes at a higher level than you expected or you set as a target for that academic year, for example? Dr. Omar?
My assessment.
Dr. Omar? We cannot hear you. You are still muted.
Okay, sorry. I think in this case, you'll have to either change the assessment method and the performance criteria, or both of these things.
Thank you very much. I think it seems that everybody would... Pooja?
So I second the point the other person has raised, but I think that then we should work on the content also. Like, we should go back into the content what we are introducing in particular course to check why students are overperforming or underperforming.
Thank you. Other possible comments? So, the improvement action is to examine multiple things. The first thing that we should really examine is what assessment method or tool are we using. Look at the level of that assessment tool and level. Actually, one of the caveats of learning outcomes assessment is assessment dilution. If you are afraid of people, for example, because it becomes a KPI and the administration or the quality assurance unit requires that all learning outcomes be attained, one unintended and sometimes intended behavior is that you reduce the level of the assessment so more students can pass and you get. And this is why having a threshold by just having a percentage sometimes is really dangerous and we need to think of. So first, yes, we go back and look at the assessment. Second, we look at the threshold, as Dr. Omar said and Pooja said also. Am I putting a reasonable threshold here? Even if I'm insisting on putting a threshold, am I putting a reasonable threshold? And reasonable means here, is it high enough? And actually, I would like you to think about, is it reasonable enough? Is it realistic enough? And I will tell you an example from nursing, and I hope that... Naram, I will come to you, so don't put your hand down. Just give me a second. Let me just come here and say, for example, if a learning outcome from a nursing skill lab that all students should wear gloves before they touch a patient, or wear gloves before they handle a blood sample from a patient. Would I accept a learning outcome like this one not to be achieved by every single person or student in the class? 100%. In a way, they should not even miss it. If they miss it once, they have to go back and show me that there is a record of not missing it for the future. So this is sometimes we have to think about this. There are some learning outcomes that have to be attained by all students at 100% level, like patient safety, for example. There's no way. Naram, before I add something, Naram?
Yes, thank you, sir. I was thinking of reviewing the content also. Why not?
Yes, Pooja, yeah,
I mean,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
you know,
yeah.
knowledge is changing like by day scale, so to speak.
Yeah.
And why not review the content itself? It might not appeal anymore to these students. They might have oversurpassed their teachers even.
Yes, and I can easily think about something like some old courses that there were in computer science courses, or courses that sometimes now are being introduced about artificial intelligence. We have to be very careful. How much do our students know about artificial intelligence before giving them a very introductory course? And fourth thing that we have to look at sometimes is how the learning outcomes are being phrased. Is it phrased in a way that is not on the level of the essence of that learning outcomes? If it's the learning outcomes, is it in a very, very simple way where assessment tools can assess it without showing us any specificities, then we have to also to look there. So all answers were good and accurate. Okay, continuous improvement. And this is very, very important. As educators, I said to you, they usually say change is the only constant. I am saying continuous improvement is the only constant in education. So we have always to go back and assess the way we are assessing the achievement of learning outcomes. And this means we have to go back and really examine how we are verifying the student achievement. Second, this should always be a feedback loop. In a way, you identify all the stakeholders of a course or a program, and you put them in certain or where they fit in the feedback loop. From where you are getting your feedback, then to whom you are giving feedback again. In many ways, although it does not seem to be a closed circle here, sometimes it has to be a closed circle. Students giving you a feedback about a certain course, you did improvement in that course. It's very good. It's actually the best practice is to go back and tell them what happened based on their feedback. And always think about the continuous improvement loop, assess, evaluate, improve, implement, and reassess. Assess and reassess and assess and reassess. I cannot emphasize enough that we have to go back and have a hard look about how we are assessing or how we are evaluating student achievement. We need a very, very, very hard look. It's not only ideas of having MCQs versus not having MCQs. The concept of authentic assessment. How I can really assess attainment of learning outcomes in a very authentic way. This is very important. Another thing that may be more important than the upcoming slides even is now AI. AI is now infringing on almost all the assessment tools that we are using now. Not all of them, but almost all of them. Anything that we like it to be represented to us in a written format, at least for the time being, can be produced by AI in a very credible way. And AI, by the time, it will learn how to write an assignment to you in a broken English language to mimic the student's broken English language, so that we'll not say, oh, if it's written in perfect English, then most likely it's plagiarized. No, they are catching, AI is catching up. So we need to really rethink how we are doing these things. Is the AI the problem, or the way we are assessing that piece of work is the problem. Can we really catch AI-produced assignments? My answer now, and I think for the long future, is no. False positives is going to be more helpful than real positives. We can discuss that in a different webinar. Now, when writing learning outcomes or designing learning outcomes, people talk about Bloom's taxonomy. I did not want to leave you without saying something about that. Bloom's taxonomy really define levels of learning, and there's at least new to me, relatively new to me, is Solo's taxonomy, which really really define in a way levels of attainment. This is why I like to put it here. So the Bloom's can really inform you how to write your learning outcomes. The taxonomy, the Solo's taxonomy, in a way, can inform you how to assess the achievement of learning outcomes. There is multiple slides here about difference between Bloom's and Solo's. Bloom's focus on cognition, on knowledge, factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, metacognitive knowledge, while Solo's more about what to do with this knowledge. Pre-structural, unistructural, multistructural, relational, abstract. It's more about performance. I know that it's not in a way the essence of this webinar, but just as a food for thought, I would like people to go and look at it and see how they can benefit from Solo taxonomy compared to the overused now Bloom's taxonomy. And thank you very much. Easy to reach on my personal email, and thank you. And I am now available to answer any questions. Thank you. Mona?
We have the floor open. Pooja, do you have a question? You have a raised hand.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Amjad. I have one question regarding the term intended learning outcomes. Although I agree with you that we should use learning outcomes instead of intended learning outcomes, but somewhere like I was asked to use. So I find that in this matrix slide here, assessment matrix slide, we ourselves are using improvement actions. So doesn't it like clash with when we have improvement actions means we can have the term intended learning outcomes, because it means learning outcomes will not be achieved 100%. So therefore we have kept improvement actions in our assessment matrix, isn't it?
Pooja, I have to disagree with you. The intention in intended learning outcomes is the educator's intention. This is why I don't like using it. I don't want the educator's intention there, that these learning outcomes are only intended. He or she plans their courses. The student will achieve what the educator intended. So it is not that anymore. So intentionality is not a part of should not be a part of learning outcomes design anymore.
Yes,
These
sir.
are the learning outcomes that I want the students to achieve, or the student must achieve. Yes. Now,
exactly.
if they did not achieve it, it's not an issue with intention or otherwise. There is a gap that have to be bridged. Could be in the student learning, could be in the learning outcome itself, it could be in the assessment, it could be in all of them, it could be in content. But these things are always debatable. There is no clear answer for such things.
Exactly. Yes, because exactly. Yeah, because recently while doing a course from one of the universities in UK, I was told to add this term in front of learning outcomes. And then definitely there was a huge debate on this. Why? Because as you said, that some things are not convincible here. But thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, please, whenever you are in a webinar or a workshop, listening to somebody talk about learning outcomes, assessment of learning outcomes, KPIs, benchmarking, strategic planning, you have to really understand that there's so many schools of thought here, and there's so many different practices here. So what usually is told to you sometimes by one group might not be the practice of another group. Some things are constant. but not everything. So keep that in your mind. And sometimes certain things that in a way does not really are not deal breakers. Take it with a grain of salt. No issue there.
Agree, sir. Thank you.
And again, the views in this presentation are my personal views. The views that the things that I committed over years, they are not representing any official directions by the Commission for Academic Accreditation or the Ministry of Education in the UAE or by any other organization. It is just my own way of progressing. I even messed up discussing my own table. Sometimes you get really confused with what you have written. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Dr. Nabil?
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor.
Alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the seminar, and it's really very valuable. In your experience, how many times should a specific learning outcome be assessed to ensure that specific student have effectively mastered this learning outcome?
I think the question should be, how do you make sure that the student have mastered the learning outcome, not the other way around? So sometimes it could be one time, which is maybe an overkill, but it could be one time. It depends in what learning outcome is there. And sometimes you have to assess it not only multiple times in the same course, you have to assess multiple times also in different courses. It depends on how mastery is going to be evaluated. Okay, but usually as educators, repetition is very, very good. No matter what how we talk about it, it's been a hallmark of education 1,000 years ago. It's still a very important thing. It's repetition. So I could never tell you how many times, but in a way, you have to decide with your colleagues, how can I really assess the mastery of a student? And this how many times also depends on the student itself. And this is something else, individualized learning. You can, I don't know what's your background, Dr. Nabil, but if just doing something simple as hammering a nail into a piece of wood can be learned by a learner sometimes by demonstrating to him or her, doing it twice. Another student might need 10 times. And sometimes you have to tell them how they can even hold a hammer first before telling them how they are going to hammer a nail into the piece of wood. So you need to look at what learning outcomes need to be achieved or skills before achieving a certain learning outcomes. Look at the individual abilities of your learners and how you think with your colleagues that a mastery in a learning outcome can be assessed. So it's not a clear-cut answer, but repetition is always good.
Thank you very much.
So,
Any other question? Dr. Hilal.
I think
Thank you very much, Prof, for your presentation. I would just like to have a comment rather than a question, and we can hear your insights, Prof, in this regarding the portfolios. When you have touched about the students has to own assessments, their own assessments or progression, they have to record their own progression. In our higher education in Oman, we don't have, I think in the foundation program, anything for students for personal growth and professional development skills. So do you call for teaching our students reflection, how to reflect, how to write reflective piece? So at a national level, before they progress to their undergrad. At the postgrad, we have the graduate studies, we have reflective writing or reflective pieces, especially in healthcare education. We have lots of portfolios and so on, but we are prepared before we start producing a portfolio. But for undergrad, what do you think?
thank you very much for the comment. I don't want to go into politics, but I would tell you that I will even go further than your suggestion or comment. We need to start making students in high school or even secondary school to express and reflect on their learning. I know they will not do that like a PhD student, but we have to start really early on, if not from home even. So reflection on the student journey in a course or in a so we can start by, in a way, going to elementary schools and ask students to reflect on their learning in the past semester. Take it up a notch and make like these reflection essays for students in the secondary school to assess their learning in the past month or past 2 months, or in mathematics all over the year. Take it a bit bigger notch and make them reflect on more smaller chunks of learning. So I don't want to say I agree or disagree with you because it was just a comment, but I do advocate for reflective essays and reflection on learning as early as possible, as early as we think our students can handle it. And I think with what we are getting now, we need these kind of genuine, authentic expressions to come out real time so that we can, in a way, get something from the student without the intervention of AI, some way or the other. So this is another maybe aspect to reflective essays or reflective journals. If we can make the student do them without the possibility of using AI, this is also another thing. So we can hear their opinions, their inner voice. So it is. I do encourage that. I do encourage that. So if I'm saying high school, I do encourage it in undergraduate. I think if we don't want to do it from year 1, you can do it from year 3, for example. But the earlier, the better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Professor Amjad, we cannot really thank you enough. It was very interesting and very informative. Actually, we've had all the participants wait with us to the end. So that's a challenge, Jami. Thank you very much. Really, it was a very nice, interesting webinar. Very good, a lot of good information that we can actually go back and implement in our own institutions. Before we end, I just wanted to highlight a couple of our upcoming sessions. Of course, our quality day is going to be November 13 and 14. We will also have a face-to-face workshop by Dr. Nariman, teaching quality monitoring and review, just to kind of have an overall capture of the teaching quality, and we go back and focus a bit more on program and course learning outcomes and assessments. Effective student support by Professor Abdussalam Ghaif in December, and most probably it will be the first week of December. Developing a comprehensive institutional research strategy by Professor Cressy Bowie in January, and then industry and community engagements and involving students in research. And we're still, we have the date set, but we still are in negotiation with the speakers. I just wanted to share, out of courtesy and spreading the quality assurance aspects, the Gulf Network is actually running now a session on the future of cross-border education in the Gulf states. So I think it started maybe at 12. So hopefully you can catch it up if you're interested. Also, as you know, we have a collaboration with CLIX. These are the 2 upcoming webinars and a face-to-face workshop in Dubai on the 25th and 26th of November. Next week, they have a Rethinking Student Assessments in the Era of AI webinar. And as you know, we have, with our agreement with them, we have 20% discount on their fees. The last point is I'd like to ask you to please settle your membership fees. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Ali, unfortunately, was not able to join us today. But we have several board members with us. Raed Nabil is on the board of directors. And on behalf of them as well, I'd like to thank you for joining us. If I can ask for one more last thing before we leave, if we would like to take a group photo for documentation purposes. So if you're interested, please turn on your cameras so you can have a group photos together. And it gives us a chance to take a look at each other's faces, and we bump into each other in events, so we might as well have a quick, I see Dr. Khalid. I'll give you just a couple more seconds and then we can take a picture. وكمان أستاذة نعيمة, if you'd like, please, to take a screenshot.
هاي مال دولة عاقة.
So just a final reminder on the Quality Day. It's on November 13th and 14th. It will be in the military college. Please sign up also for registration. Also, if your institution is willing or would like to sponsor us, we've had a couple of sponsors, inshallah. And please share the info with any of your colleagues who didn't get our emails. Or if you're interested in getting our emails, please email or send me personally an email and I will share it with Naima. Thank you for joining us again, Professor.
Don't worry. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Professor Amjad, thank you very much for the webinar. We really enjoyed it. And I've already have a lot of thank yous in the comment box, the chat box, thanking you for this really informative presentation. Thanks a lot. And we look forward definitely to working with you again, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Shukran.
Assalamu alaikum.